Chapter 1. The hustle never stops. The city was alive, restless, a constant hum of energy that echoed through the streets of New York. It was the kind of morning where everything felt like it was moving a little too fast. Cars honked, people rushed to their destinations, and the sidewalks were crowded with people trying to make their mark in the world. Cardi B was no different. She was always on the move, always chasing the next big thing, the next show, the next deal. Life was a constant hustle, and Cardi loved it. Her black Maybach rumbled down the street as she tapped the steering wheel, the rhythm matching the beats she was always creating in her head. Cardi had come a long way. From the Bronx, from nothing, she had risen to become one of the most influential women in music, business, and culture. But with all that success came pressure. The kind of pressure that never left you. The kind of pressure that came with being the face of a global empire. Today, she was heading to a meeting with one of the biggest music labels in the world. The kind of meeting that could take her career to new heights. They wanted to sign her new label to a multi-million-dollar deal. The stakes were high, but Cardi wasn't nervous. She had been in this game long enough to know how to handle herself. Still, her mind was racing. There were always a million things running through her head at once. The next song, the next video, her business ventures. Every second counted. As she made her way downtown, she thought about her upcoming tour, the wardrobe, the performances, the millions of fans who would be waiting for her in every city. She wasn't just a rapper. She was a force, a brand. People didn't just love her music, they loved her authenticity. And that was the key to her success. Cardi had never been afraid to be herself, no matter what anyone thought. But as she approached a busy intersection, something unexpected happened. Her car sputtered, then stalled completely. Cardi muttered a curse under her breath, trying to restart the engine. No luck. The engine refused to come back to life, and she was stuck right in the middle of the road. Of all the times now, she glanced at the clock on the dashboard. She was going to be late, and she hated being late. This meeting was too important. It was her chance to secure her future for the next decade. Ugh, not today, she muttered to herself, slamming the steering wheel with one hand. She knew that if she didn't act quickly, she'd be stuck here for a while, surrounded by impatient drivers and honking horns. New York traffic was already a nightmare, and now she was a part of it. She checked her phone. No service. Great. Not only was her car dead, but she was also stuck here without a way to call for help. Cardi was already feeling the pressure mounting. It wasn't just about the meeting anymore. It was about saving face. Cardi had built her empire from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let a dead battery ruin her reputation. She looked around, scanning the busy street for a mechanic, a tow truck, anyone who could help. That's when she noticed him. A man on a beat-up motorcycle was weaving through traffic, moving past honking cars like he didn't have a care in the world. He wasn't in a hurry, not like the rest of the drivers. There was something about the way he rode, slow but sure, that caught her attention. He looked out of place, like he was in a different world entirely. His clothes were rough, nothing fancy, no suit, no designer jacket, but there was a certain energy about him, like he had a purpose. She watched as he got closer, the rumbling of his bike growing louder in the chaotic symphony of the street. She almost felt like he wasn't real for a second, like he was a mirage, a brief distraction from the chaos of the moment. But then, he pulled up next to her Maybach, bringing her back to reality. The guy was tall, his dark skin contrasting with the leather jacket he wore, a bit worn but still functional. He took off his helmet and gave her a quick look, his gaze lingering on her for a moment, like he was sizing her up. Cardi raised an eyebrow, wondering if he was going to say something or just keep moving. "You need help?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. There was no hesitation in his tone, no judgment. Just simple, no-nonsense help. Cardi felt a flicker of something inside her. Maybe it was her frustration, or maybe it was the fact that he was offering help without asking for anything in return. She had never been the type to trust strangers, but something about this guy made her want to. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at him, trying to get a read on him. He didn't look like the kind of guy who would care about helping a celebrity. But maybe that was exactly why she should trust him. "I'm fine. I've called roadside assistance," she said coolly, trying to brush him off. She didn't want to waste time talking to some random guy on a motorcycle. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? You're blocking the whole street. Doesn't look like they're coming anytime soon. His tone was light, like he was making a suggestion, not giving an order. Cardi's lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced around. The cars were still honking, people were impatient, and her time was running out. You really think I have time for this? She said, her voice sharp, though not as dismissive as she meant it to be. The man didn't flinch. He simply shrugged as if to say, I'm here anyway. For a moment, Cardi was caught. She didn't have time to argue, and besides, if he could actually help, it might be worth the risk. All right, she muttered. Go ahead, but if you mess with my car, I'll make sure you never get a gig in this city again. He smiled, the kind of smile that felt genuine and not forced. Wouldn't dream of it. And with that, he opened the hood of her car, and Cardi had to admit she felt a little relief. The man knew what he was doing. A few moments later, after some tinkering under the hood, he looked up at her with a satisfied grin. Try it now. Cardi hesitated for a second, then pushed the start button. To her surprise, the engine roared back to life, the sound music to her ears. She blinked in disbelief. You're a miracle worker, she said, shaking her head. The man shrugged again, clearly unfazed by her gratitude. It's just a battery issue. Nothing too complicated. Cardi gave him a skeptical look, but she was grateful. You sure you're not some undercover mechanic? What's your name? I'm Andre, he said simply, and I just saw you needed help. Cardi smiled, but it wasn't the flashy smile she usually wore for the cameras. This one was more genuine, softer. All right, Andre, she said, you got my car fixed. I owe you one. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the seat to him. Here, call me sometime. We'll see if you can help me out again. Andre looked at the card, but before he could say anything, she spoke again. Now I gotta run. I'm late for something important. With that, she put the car in gear and smoothly pulled away, her Maybach disappearing into the New York traffic, leaving Andre standing on the side of the road, wondering what just happened. Chapter 2. The Roadside Connection. Andre Lawson leaned against his motorcycle, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He had been in New York for a while now, chasing dreams that seemed so far out of reach. It wasn't that he didn't try. He did. He had hustled for every little thing. Every interview he went to, every job he applied for, he poured his heart into it, hoping for something to stick. But life had a way of slamming the door just when he thought it might open. Today was no different. The morning had started with so much promise. Andre had landed an interview with a high-end company that could change his entire life. He had studied the company's background, memorized every line in the job description, rehearsed answers to every possible question. He was ready. He was prepared. But then fate stepped in the way it always did, unexpected, uninvited. His motorcycle sputtered and died just as he was about to head into the interview. He had tried to restart it, cursed under his breath, checked the gas tank, kicked the tires. Nothing worked. The interview was in 30 minutes, and he could feel the heavy weight of opportunity slipping through his fingers. His stomach churned at the thought of missing it. He stood there on the side of the road, his hands on his hips, feeling both helpless and furious. It was always like this. Every time something good seemed to be within reach, something or someone pulled it away. That's when he saw her. A black Maybach had stopped in the middle of the street, hazard lights flashing like a signal for help. The sleek car, far more expensive than anything Andre had ever owned, was surrounded by the noise and chaos of the city. Drivers honking, pedestrians yelling, taxis swerving to avoid it. The car was stalled, but it wasn't the car that caught his attention. It was the woman standing beside it. She was tall, her figure commanding attention even in the middle of the chaos. She was dressed in a crisp, well-tailored blazer that seemed to shimmer against the city backdrop. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her face radiant with power, but now furrowed with frustration. She gripped her phone tightly, as if willing it to connect to a signal. Andre hesitated. He was running out of time. He had an interview he couldn't afford to miss, but something about her made him pause. She was stuck, and no one was helping her. For a moment, he almost kept going. He wasn't a mechanic, after all. What could he possibly do? He didn't have time to get involved with someone else's problems. Yet, Something in him tugged at the idea of helping. It was a split-second decision, one he didn't even fully understand. But he found himself making a sharp turn, crossing through lanes of traffic, and rolling up next to her. He parked the bike with a slight jerk, the sound of the engine dying down as he slid off. The woman looked at him, eyes narrowing at the sight of a stranger in a leather jacket, standing next to her high-end car. Andre had no doubt that he looked out of place. He cleared his throat and leaned casually against his bike, trying to appear confident. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. For a moment, she said nothing, just took him in with a calculating look. It was the kind of look that made him feel like he was under a microscope. She assessed him like a puzzle piece she wasn't sure where to fit. Her grip on the phone tightened. She looked at the busy street around her, clearly weighing her options. "I've called roadside assistance," she replied, her voice cool, almost dismissive. It was the kind of tone Andre had heard before when someone was trying to end a conversation quickly. He chuckled softly, rubbing his hand over the back of his neck. "You sure you want to wait? You're blocking the whole street, lady." Her lips pressed into a thin line, the tension in her jaw evident. Andre could see the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't want to trust him. Couldn't blame her. Who would? A random guy on a rusted motorcycle offering to help her fix a car worth more than his rent? Her gaze flicked down to her phone again, likely trying to find any possible way out of the situation. "No service," she muttered under her breath. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the frustration clearly weighing on her. Andre took a deep breath, ignoring the growing pressure of his own missed opportunity. If he didn't do something, she was going to be stuck here for God knows how long. "It's just a battery issue," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Pop the hood. I'll take a look." She hesitated again, clearly battling the instinct to refuse him. But with the traffic piling up and no other options, she finally relented, pushing the button to release the hood. She stepped back, watching him as he moved to the front of the car. Andre glanced under the hood, quickly scanning the engine. He wasn't a mechanic, but years of working on his own motorcycle had taught him a thing or two about engines. The problem was clear: a loose battery terminal. Simple enough to fix, especially since it was just a matter of tightening a bolt. With quick, practiced hands, he adjusted the terminal, making sure it was securely fastened. He didn't say a word as he worked, his focus entirely on the task. Cardi stood to the side, her eyes darting back and forth between him and the busy traffic. A few minutes later, Andre stood back, wiping his hands on his jeans. "All right, try it now." She slid into the driver's seat, her fingers hesitating for a second before pressing the start button. To Andre's relief, and her own, the engine roared back to life. Cardi blinked, surprised. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered, a smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't think you could pull it off." Andre shrugged, not needing the praise. "It's not a big deal. Just a loose connection." She gave him a look, one that was equal parts grateful and impressed. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer than before, though still carrying that unmistakable air of confidence. Andre checked his phone. His stomach dropped when he saw the time. He was 15 minutes late. He stood there for a moment, torn between what he wanted to say and what he knew was a lost cause. The interview was over. His one chance for a better life had slipped through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do about it now. He looked at his bike, the familiar weight of failure sinking into his chest. "Not anymore," he muttered under his breath. He had no choice but to walk away. But just as he started to turn, her voice stopped him. "You were on your way somewhere important, weren't you?" she asked, her tone not quite a question, but a realization. Andre swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Yeah," he said, shaking his head. "I was. But it's gone now." There was a pause, and then, to his surprise, she reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek business card, pressing it into his palm. He barely had time to glance at it before she was speaking again. "Call me," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll see what I can do." He didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth to protest, to tell her he didn't need charity, but the words didn't come. Instead, he stuffed the card into his pocket. She didn't give him time to protest anyway. With a swift motion, she slid into the car, slammed the door shut, and with a press of the pedal, disappeared into the traffic, leaving Andre standing there, his future uncertain. He stared at the spot where her car had been for a long moment, the weight of everything he'd just let slip away pressing down on him. And yet, even as he stood there, his hands still holding the card, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Chapter 3. A surprising invitation. Andre didn't know what to expect when he finally made it back to his tiny apartment. The weight of the day had settled in like a thick fog that refused to lift. The interview was over. The opportunity that could have pulled him out of his endless cycle of temp jobs and missed chances had slipped through his fingers. He should have been prepared. He had been prepared. But nothing had gone according to plan, not once today. Sitting on his worn-out couch, Andre ran his hand through his hair, frustration mounting. The words from the email notification on his phone echoed in his mind. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with other candidates. The familiar sting of rejection never got any easier. He had been so sure that this time would be different, that this time the door would open. But now he was back to square one. His phone buzzed again, dragging him from his thoughts. The notification wasn't from the job company. It was a text message. He frowned as he saw the number, an unfamiliar area code. His thumb hesitated over the screen before he opened it. It was a brief message. "This is Cardi. Call me." His heart skipped a beat. The woman he had helped earlier, the one whose car he had fixed? Cardi B. The same Cardi B who had built an empire, not just in music, but also in business. His brain scrambled to make sense of it. Why was she reaching out to him? Was she just being polite? Or did she have some other motive? Andre's mind raced with questions, none of which made any sense. He stared at the screen, unsure whether to call her back. What could she possibly want with someone like him? He was just a guy who had missed a shot, a guy who fixed her car on a whim. Nothing more. He wasn't some big shot. He wasn't even sure what he was doing half the time. But there was something about the message that lingered. Call me. The simplicity of it, the firmness behind it. It wasn't some casual invitation. It felt urgent, like she was waiting for him to take the next step. After a long moment of contemplation, Andre pressed the dial button. His nerves were shot, his heart racing in his chest. The phone rang twice before she answered. Hello. Her voice was smooth, confident. It was the same tone she had used when she spoke to him earlier, but now it held an air of expectation, like she was just waiting for him to speak. Hi, it's Andre, he said, his voice coming out a little more hesitant than he wanted it to. From earlier, with the car. I remember, she replied coolly. You missed your interview today, didn't you? Andre swallowed hard. He hadn't expected her to bring it up so bluntly. His stomach twisted, and he could feel the bitterness rise up in his throat. Yeah, I did. I wasn't able to make it. My bike broke down, and, well, it's just one of those things. It happens, right? She was silent for a beat, as if she were considering her next words carefully. Andre was starting to wonder if she was regretting giving him her card. But then, she spoke, her tone direct and unyielding. You should have been there. But now you're here, she said. And I don't think you're the type to let things slide. I think you want more. Andre's heart skipped a beat. More? She didn't even know him. What would she possibly think he wanted? The desperation to prove himself, to make it in this cutthroat world. It was all he'd ever known. But what did she see in him? I'm not sure what you mean, he said, his voice cracking just a little. I don't want charity. I don't want anything handed to me. I'm not offering charity, Andre. Cardi cut in, her voice firm, with no trace of pity. I'm offering you a shot. A real one. I can see you've got hustle, but hustle alone isn't enough. You need to be where the doors open. You need to make your own way. And I think you can. Andre sat there for a moment, stunned. Was she really offering him a shot at something? He could hardly believe it. His instincts told him to decline. It felt too surreal. She was a CEO, a mogul in her own right. What could she possibly want with someone like him? But then her next words hit him like a ton of bricks. Meet me in my office tomorrow, she said, her tone final. We'll see if you're serious about this. If you're really ready to take your life in a new direction. Andre's mind was spinning, but before he could answer, the line went dead. She had hung up, leaving him with nothing but the sound of his heartbeat in his ears. His hand shook as he pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen. He ran his fingers over his forehead, trying to steady himself. Was this a joke? Was he being punked? He wasn't the type to get caught up in dreams of fame or success. But this felt different. This felt like a real opportunity. The kind of opportunity that people spent their whole lives waiting for. The kind that most would kill for. But what if he wasn't ready? What if he couldn't handle it? What if he wasn't cut out for this world of power suits and big deals? The thoughts flooded his mind, each one fighting for space. He had always been the guy who took the long road, the guy who worked his way up from the bottom, scraping by. But this could be his shot to step into a world he had always dreamed of, to be more than just another guy in the crowd. With a heavy sigh, Andre stood up from the couch. He walked to the window and stared out at the city, the lights twinkling like 1,000 stars. The same city that had always felt so big, so overwhelming. But now it didn't feel so out of reach. He could see it, his future, right there in front of him. Tomorrow, he would meet Cardi B. He didn't know what was going to happen, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. And hope, no matter how small, was a hell of a thing to hold on to. Chapter 4. The Artist's World. Andre had never seen anything like it. He had been to corporate offices before, the kind with fluorescent lights and beige cubicles, where everyone shuffled around like drones, typing away at keyboards in a sterile, lifeless environment. This was something different. The building loomed above him, a sleek tower of glass and steel that seemed to reflect every possible version of the future, but none of them looked like his. The lobby was massive, the floors gleaming with a high-polished shine, reflecting the pristine white walls and minimalist furniture. He felt small as he stepped through the front doors, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The receptionist, a woman in a sharp, tailored suit that looked like it cost more than his entire wardrobe, barely glanced up as he approached. The air was thick with the sense of power that hung in every corner. Andre shifted uncomfortably, unsure if he should even be here. He was just a guy who fixed a celebrity's car. What did he have to offer in a place like this? Name? The receptionist asked, her tone cool, as if the sight of him didn't faze her in the slightest. Andre Lawson, he replied, his voice a bit unsure. He wasn't used to being here, wasn't used to being seen by people who mattered. Her brow furrowed slightly, clearly having never heard of him. Do you have an appointment? She asked, her gaze flicking to the monitor in front of her. Andre hesitated. What exactly was this? He wasn't sure if he had an appointment. He wasn't even sure what was happening right now. But she didn't give him time to answer. Before he could muster a response, a voice cut through the silence. Mr. Lawson is expected. Andre turned to see a woman standing by the elevators. She was tall in a sleek black suit, holding a tablet against her chest. Her presence commanded attention, her expression unreadable. There was something sharp about her, something calculating. This was no assistant from the front desk. This was someone important. Follow me, she said, her tone professional and unyielding. She didn't wait for him to respond, already turning toward the elevator, and Andre had no choice but to follow. As they rode in silence, Andre's nerves gnawed at him. He tried not to look too out of place, adjusting his jacket as the elevator rose. He was acutely aware of how far out of his league he was. Every inch of this building screamed wealth and success. The walls were lined with expensive artwork, the floors covered in rich carpets that looked like they belonged in a palace. The elevator chimed softly as they reached the top floor, and the door slid open with a quiet swish. Andre stepped out, his heart racing in his chest. He was led down a hallway with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. The sight was breathtaking, but only made him feel more out of place. The people around him moved with purpose, each one seemingly confident in their place. He wasn't sure how he fit into all of this, if he fit at all. Finally, they stopped in front of a set of double doors. The woman in the suit pressed a button on the wall, and the doors opened automatically. Inside was a space so different from what he had expected. It was sleek and modern, but far from the cold, corporate look he had imagined. The office was warm, filled with natural light streaming through the massive windows. The furniture was minimalist but high-end, each piece purposeful and precise. There was a sense of control in the air, like everything in this room had been curated for success. And standing by the window, arms crossed, was Cardi B. She turned as he entered, her sharp eyes locking onto him. Her gaze was intense, assessing, as though she were looking right through him. He felt exposed, like she could see everything, the nervousness, the doubt, the hunger for more. But there was also something else in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or was it something else entirely? Sit, she said simply, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her voice was commanding, but not harsh. It was the voice of someone who had earned every inch of power they held and wasn't afraid to make that clear. Andre did as she asked, sitting down across from her. He tried to keep his composure, but the discomfort was impossible to ignore. He had imagined meeting Cardi B in a different setting, not in an office like this, not in the world she had built for herself. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she were measuring him up, deciding something in her mind. He didn't say anything. What was there to say? He had no idea why he was here. What did she want from him? "You helped me yesterday," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was softer now, but still assertive. "You didn't have to. You had somewhere to be, but you chose to help me anyway." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving his face. "Do you know how rare that is?" Andre shifted in his seat, a little uncomfortable with the attention, with the weight of her words. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a car. Cardi raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint smile that wasn't exactly warm but held a certain amusement. "It wasn't just a car, Andre. I was stuck in the middle of a busy street, a high-profile person with a brand and reputation to protect. My car breaking down could have cost me millions, could have ruined my whole day. But you didn't hesitate. You helped, even when it wasn't your problem. That's not something I see every day. And that's why I'm here talking to you." Andre blinked, confused. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" Cardi leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "I'm offering you a chance. I'm offering you a real opportunity." She spoke each word with precision, like they were deliberate, measured. "I don't give these out lightly, but I see something in you. You got that hunger, that drive. People like you don't wait around for things to happen. They make them happen. You helped me because it was the right thing to do, not because you were expecting something in return. And that's something I can respect." Andre was still trying to wrap his head around it all. Was she serious? Cardi B wasn't just some random rich person. She was a legend in the music world, a mogul. She had built a brand that spanned more than just music. And now she was sitting here, telling him that she saw something in him. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure if he even believed what was happening. "I'm saying you're hired," Cardi replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "I have a position open in my company. It's yours if you want it, but you have to want it. You have to prove that you're ready to walk this road." Andre couldn't speak. He felt the weight of her words settle over him, but it felt like a dream he didn't want to wake up from. He had come here today expecting nothing, and now she was offering him a chance to change his life. He wasn't sure what to say. What could he say? He was overwhelmed, but also electrified by the opportunity she was giving him. This was it. This could be the break he had been waiting for his entire life. He took a deep breath, his hand gripping the armrests of the chair as he tried to steady himself. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady, filled with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes." Cardi nodded, a glint of approval in her eyes. "Good. I like that. We'll see what you've got." Chapter 5. The show must go on. The first few days at Cardi B's company were a blur. Andre's mind was still trying to catch up with the magnitude of what had just happened. One minute, he was standing on the side of the road, fixing a celebrity's car, and the next, he was inside a towering glass building, with a desk of his own, surrounded by the fast-paced world of business, fame, and fortune. Cardi had given him a real chance, but the weight of that opportunity was overwhelming. Every inch of the office was polished, gleaming with the scent of expensive leather and the hum of busy, powerful people. It felt like a world far removed from the gritty streets he was used to, but he was determined not to let it break him. He had a desk now, a sleek black one, with a computer that practically glowed in the dim light of the office. It was hard to shake the feeling of imposter syndrome that clung to him like a second skin. He was no one here, just another rookie trying to prove himself. The first week was all about settling in. Andre spent hours reading reports, trying to understand the massive empire Cardi had built. He wasn't just working for her. He was stepping into a machine that moved at the speed of light, with its own rules, its own expectations. Every meeting, every conversation was a game of survival. The world she navigated was one of wealth, influence, and status, and it wasn't a place for mistakes. But Andre wasn't about to let that stop him. Every morning, he woke up early, double-checked his work, and gave everything he had. He knew that this was the opportunity of a lifetime. People didn't just get second chances like this. They didn't just walk into Cardi B's world and get a free pass. On his third day, he was called into Cardi's office. He stood outside the door for a few seconds before knocking. He wasn't sure what this meeting would be about, but he felt the nerves settle in his stomach, tightening with every passing second. He had worked hard the past few days, trying to prove himself, but he had no idea if it was enough. When the door swung open, the assistant who had guided him into the building that first day greeted him with a nod. "Miss B is expecting you," she said, her eyes never meeting his as she moved aside to let him in. Cardi's office was exactly what Andre had imagined: sleek, minimalist, and commanding. There was a giant window that framed the city below, a view that felt like it could swallow him whole. Cardi was standing by the window, her silhouette sharp against the backdrop of the skyline, arms crossed as she stared out at the city. Her presence filled the room, making it feel both intimate and distant all at once. "Sit," she said, not looking at him. He obeyed, taking a seat across from her desk. Cardi turned slowly, fixing him with a gaze that felt both piercing and assessing. The silence between them was thick with anticipation. Andre could feel his palms sweating. "You've been working hard," she said, her tone measured, as if weighing every word. "But I need to see more from you. This isn't just about working hard, Andre. It's about working smart. It's about having vision. And right now, I'm not sure you have that." Andre's stomach dropped. Working smart? He thought he'd been doing everything right. The reports, the meetings, the late nights. He'd done it all. But she was right. He had been so focused on just keeping up, on not falling behind, that he hadn't stopped to think about what came next. He hadn't been looking at the bigger picture. "I can do it," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "I'll prove it to you. I've got ideas. I just need the chance to show you." Cardi studied him for a long moment, the silence thick with her scrutiny. Finally, she leaned forward slightly, her fingers tapping on the desk in a rhythm that echoed in the stillness. "Good," she said, the words simple but powerful. "Because I don't hand out opportunities to people who can't think bigger than the task at hand. You're going to prepare a presentation for the executive board. I need a financial analysis on our upcoming ventures. It's a lot of pressure, but I want to see how you handle it." A chill ran down Andre's spine. The executive board. He had never even spoken to anyone on the board, and now she was asking him to present in front of them. His mind raced with the thought of it. He had no corporate experience. He barely understood the complex world of finance and high-end business dealings. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything he had worked for. "I'll do it," he said, his voice more confident now, despite the growing panic inside him. "I'll have it ready. When do you need it?" "Friday," she replied, her tone unwavering. "That's in 2 days, Andre. You better be ready." Andre nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't have time to waste. This wasn't just a test. It was his chance to prove that he belonged here, that he could handle the pressure of the corporate world, and that he had the vision Cardi B was looking for. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Andre dove headfirst into spreadsheets, data, and reports, trying to make sense of the financial projections. It was like learning a new language. Numbers and figures spun around him, and he felt like he was drowning in a sea of them. But he refused to let that stop him. He worked late into the night, his mind focused solely on the presentation, ignoring the exhaustion that was creeping in. By the time Friday came around, Andre hadn't slept much. His eyes were heavy, his body sore from hours of sitting at his desk, pouring over every detail. But he was ready. He had to be. The moment he stepped into the boardroom, a wave of nervous energy washed over him. He could feel the eyes of the executives on him, their cold stares like a pressure that weighed down on his chest. They were all sharp, polished, and successful. And he was the guy who fixed Cardi B's car 2 days ago. He had no experience, no qualifications, and no real place in this room. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. He cleared his throat, stood tall, and began to speak. The first few words were shaky, but as he moved through the presentation, he found his rhythm. He spoke with conviction, his voice growing stronger as he explained the financial analysis, the projections, and the potential growth. The numbers made sense to him now. The pieces of the puzzle started clicking into place. By the time he finished, there was a tense silence in the room. Then, slowly, one of the older executives leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Well done," he said, his voice low but approving. Andre exhaled, the tension in his shoulders melting away. He had done it. For the first time, he had proven that he belonged in this world. Later that day, Cardi called him into her office again. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him closely as he entered. Andre stood before her, his heart still racing from the boardroom. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You handled yourself well today," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "But this is just the beginning. You've shown me you have the chops to survive here. But don't get comfortable. The real work is just starting." Andre nodded, understanding the weight of her words. This wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from the challenge. He was embracing it. He was ready to rise, no matter how high the stakes were.
If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and motivates us to continue sharing heartwarming, inspiring stories almost every day.